One of the traps people can fall into is thinking that it's best to stay in a given moment when actually it's time to move on and do something else. Moving on, though, doesn't have to involve abandoning the good thing one was enjoying, nor does it have to mean doing something entirely unrelated to it. Rather, at its best, I think, it can mean using the moment one has been fortunate enough to enjoy as a springboard in the pursuit of a further goal which complements the good one had been enjoying originally. Now, the disciples weren't immune from this danger, and a good example of it occurred at the Transfiguration. Peter, you will recall, had suggested to our Lord that he erect some tents so that Christ, Moses, and Elijah could stay on the mountain with the disciples, presumably remaining in attendance. What's wrong with the disciples enjoying this revelation of Christ's divinity, though? Why shouldn't they remain? Yet, if they had, our Lord's mission would have stalled or even failed. After all, if Christ had remained on the mountain, nobody else would have heard his words or would have been inspired by his deeds. So once God the Father had confirmed Christ's divine identity, Christ led his disciples down the mountain to continue to preach the gospel. Now, it's not difficult to imagine the disciples being vulnerable to a similar error just prior to Christ's ascension. After all, they had experienced the trauma of our Lord's death, and now they were enjoying the glory of his resurrection. It would be perfectly natural for them to want to stay in that moment and enjoy it. After all they had been through, why shouldn't Christ stay with them? What harm could be done by this? And what goal might have been missed if he had? Quite a lot, as it turns out, however, one reason on the part of Christ and another on the part of the disciples. Take Christ's role first. Just think about how we enter heaven. It's not as if we can find a way under our own steam, even if we're really careful. We can't jump our way into heaven, no matter how well we can jump. We can't walk into heaven, no matter how well we can walk. Nor indeed do any of our meritorious actions entail that God must let us into heaven. God's freedom is absolute, and he condescends to act in a given way only according to the manner in which he has disposed the economy of salvation. There is no obligation incurred on God's part, just his determination to be faithful to his covenant with us. Rather, if we are to enter heaven, the gate to heaven has first to be opened, and once opened, then we have to be drawn in, and that's what's going on in the Ascension. Christ, the head of the mystical body, the church, enters heaven first, preparing a way for us and drawing all the members of his mystical body into heaven. Had Christ not done this then, none of us would have had the opportunity to enter heaven, and our lives would have been very different as a result. Second, though, we can also focus on the disciples' role. In the gospel, they're told quite clearly that they have to preach the gospel to take it to the ends of the earth. That's their task, because in order to be drawn into heaven, we have to be part of Christ's mystical body, and will only be part of it if we hear the gospel and respond to it in faith. Yet, for any of that to happen, the gospel must be preached, which, as we said, is the task of these disciples and those that followed, i.e. us. So, if Christ and the disciples had just enjoyed the glory of his resurrection, much indeed would have been lost. Fortunately, they did not, and the gates of heaven were open, and new possibilities emerged for all human beings. Yet, crucial as that is, whilst we celebrate this today, it's worth sparing a thought for what other opportunities might be set before us and might be lost to us if we choose to stay in a given moment rather than reaching out in faith to a new goal.